for having called this conference to acknowledge and pay tribute to Gustaf's life and his work. Yale very cleverly had postcards printed for these event, and she sent numbers of them out to. Are you having trouble, Harris, hearing me? Is this amplifying?
Yeah, we just
maybe
have
I
to
need
keep
to
it very
talk into the
close.
top of it. That's what it is. All right, sorry about that. I'm technologically challenged here. In any event, I sent out very, very large numbers of them to everybody I know in the Western world, and got also some wonderful responses back, including one from Nina Zvančevek, who was one of Serbia's leading poets who lived in New York for a long, long time. And she just wrote and said, "Thank you and everyone at the Poetry Center for all the good work you're doing for Gustaf Sobin. It's so rare." Now, I'm going to speak very anecdotally also. I'm going to tell you about visiting Gustaf in 2004. I happened to be in Morocco at a conference, and it was a long, protracted conference, and my luggage had been lost, blah, blah, blah. While I was there, I got a telephone call from California informing me that the sheets for the sign-limited edition of a book I did with Gustaf had been found. They had been with the binder for years, and they'd been lost. They were retrieved. It was like a major event. I was called, and Gustaf was also called. So after this conference, I called Gustaf and said, "Look, I'm in Morocco. I have no luggage, blah, blah, blah. I'm a vagabond, clochard, but I'm going to travel up to visit you." And because he wanted me to come and visit him to discuss his archive. In any event, I just want to speak briefly about what it was like to visit with Gustaf and his family. The first evening I was there, he asked me to tell stories, and I was telling publisher stories. My eye kept looking at an object on a piece of furniture. And Gustaf saw my eye looking at this. He walked over and picked it up and lovingly handed it to me. It was a 6th century AD Gallo-Roman jar that he, of course, had found in the fields of Provence. And the next day he said, "Oh, we need to get some more wine." We drove over to a winery, and we started walking towards the winery, and Gustaf said, Are you interested in Samuel Beckett? And I said, "Of course, everybody's interested in Samuel Beckett. What's not to like?" So as we got closer to the winery, Gustaf pointed out the skyline there of trees. And it was all second growth trees that were small, and there was one very large oak tree. And he said, "Note that oak tree." And he said, "By the way, Samuel Beckett lived in this very building that we're about to visit during World War II, during the German occupation." And he said, because there was no fuel, the Germans took everything. The people cut all the trees, all these oak trees, in order to stay warm. He said that single oak tree, large oak tree dominating that landscape, is the stage setting for Waiting for Godot. It's a bare stage with one oak tree. In any event, shortly after, the two of us were in Gould, and we went into a cafe, and several friends of Gustaf's came over, and Gustaf introduced me, blah, blah, blah. We had a glass of wine, and it was made known that I was coming from Morocco, and in the spirit of badinage, one of his friends said something to me about Ariel Sharon, and I made an appropriate dismissive remark about Ariel Sharon. The next day, Gustaf and I were in his cabinet, and he started talking to me about something which we had never touched upon before. And he said, "You know, Jeffrey, living in France is very difficult for the Jewish community now, for many reasons, one of them being the massive Muslim presence in France." So what Gustaf started talking to me about was something that that he had recently rediscovered in his own life, and that was his own Judaism. He said he started reading Gershom Scholem, the great German-Israeli scholar of the Kabbalah, and what he learned, amongst many things, was that there was a village not 40 kilometers from Les Maquignons and Gould, where medieval rabbis had been extraordinarily important in elaborating the Kabbalah. Gustaf was spending time going down to this little village, and he laughed and he said, Jeffrey, whereas the Jews have Palestine and Israel, the Muslims have this village. It was filled with Algerian workers. But what Gustaf had discovered was he said it was a pottery, an abandoned pottery that had been this medieval synagogue where these important rabbis in the Middle Ages were elaborating and practicing the Kabbalah. And then what Gustaf said to me, which I found electrifying, was he said, Jeffrey, after reading Gershom Scholem, what I realized was that all my life, these rabbis in this village were fiddling the planetary dials and directing my life. Then Gustaf then proceeded to tell me that he had been having a long correspondence with a Palestinian woman who was a graduate student at a German university taking her PhD in philosophy. And that she had written Gustaf to discuss his poetry, and the correspondence had gone on and on. Gustaf then said, Jeffrey, there's a book I want to write, but nobody will publish it. And I said, oh, what is that, Gustaf? And he said, a story of a love between a Jew and a Muslim, one from America, one from Palestine, and I want to write that, but nobody will publish it. And I said, Gustaf, I will publish that book. We simply shook hands. It was like a fait accompli. It was something that would take place in the future. But of course, Gustaf died. Now, Mr. Ed Foster.